News over the last week and a half really has understandably been dominated by the American election. But the other big story, so to say, um, is the attack in Vienna and also other attacks around the world connected with Islamic extremism. Four people were killed in Vienna. That ranks as Austria's worst terrorist attack, I believe, since the Vienna airport attack in 1985. Um, But in the last few days, 50 people have been beheaded, not just killed, beheaded in the troubled region of Cabo Delgado in Mozambique. And Mozambique is a country that in 1992 emerged from one of the bloodiest civil wars of the 20th century, 800,000 to 1 million dead. A very poor country, a country that in many ways is still developing. But estimates are between 1 and 3,000 people, looking at different sources, have now died in this Islamist insurgency in Cabo Delgado since it kind of broke out in the late 2010s. So I think that's going to become a new front line in this war against Islamic extremism, war against Islamism, call it what you will. But I think Sebastian Kurz, the Austrian Chancellor, is absolutely right to say that Europe needs to wake up to the threat of Islamism. And I'm encouraged by the fact that leaders are starting to be more honest about this. Emmanuel Macron's been very outspoken. His country, of course, has been through, has really been on the front line of this. I'm not saying more so, for example, countries in the Middle East and West Africa, they really are on the front line in terms of Europe. Um, but what the attack in Austria showed was those who are saying, oh, well, it's French secularism. I've heard people say it's France's secularism that caused this, France's aggressive so-called secularism. But Austria doesn't have the same secular tradition that France does, and they were targeted. The world needs to wake up and understand that Islamic extremism is a totalitarian ideology that cannot be negotiated with. They want submission. They want absolute submission of non-Muslims, and indeed Muslims for that matter who don't agree with them, to their perverse notion of the Ummah, the Islamic Caliphate as they see it. For too long, Western liberal democracies have taken the view that we need to somehow not talk about this, because if we do, that somehow equates to anti-Muslim bigotry. But I've just seen an attitude from one of my contacts. Now, to be fair, her English isn't great, so maybe some loss in translation going on. She's from Indonesia. When I posted about what happened in Cabo Delgado, her first response was defensiveness. She said, terrible what happened. We cannot say everyone is Islamic extremism. And it was all the usual narrative of Islam is peace, which I've seen many, many times. There are still many, many Muslims that insist with a straight face that they can push this propaganda and demand that people accept and believe it. That's why what the Scottish Justice Minister Hamza Yusuf is pushing in his hate crime legislation needs to be so scrutinised, because left unchecked, I think that could be interpreted in such a way that criticising Islam will be um, prohibited. That sounds like hyperbole, but I think we need to be very, very wary of how hate crime legislation is used. I take the view that if someone is promoting violence against another group, any group, that should be dealt with. That's inflammatory and that's wrong. But someone simply saying they hate or dislike Islam, that should not be a criminal offence, because that is different from saying they hate Muslims as people. Now, if we look at the facts in Europe, more Europeans have died from Islamist attacks in recent years. Let's say the last 2 decades as an example, than in neo-nationalist or far-right attacks. 5 of Europe's deadliest terrorist attacks, in fact, not just in the last 20 years, of all time, of those top 5, 4 of them have been Islamist. And I'm going to quote them here. The Madrid bombing of 2004, bombings actually, 191 killed. That's Europe's deadliest terrorist attack. Second, the Paris attack of 2015. I'm talking about in recent decades here. The Paris attack of 2015, 131 killed, Islamist. The Nice attack of 2016, 86 killed, Islamist. Then the fourth deadliest, and I don't like ranking in this way, but it is important for context. Fourth deadliest, the Norway attack. That was obviously a neo-Nazi incident, Anders Breivik, terrorist attack, but neo-Nazi. And then the fifth is the London bombings of 2005, 52 killed. And then when you add up all the other incidents, the Westminster Bridge attack, the Brussels attack, the Berlin attack, the Barcelona attack, the Vienna attack, the numerous other attacks in France, it really adds up. The majority of them have been Islamist. There have also been some neo-nationalist incidents as well, like the shooting in Hanau in Germany earlier this year. So that is a threat. And then there's been lone wolf incidents like the assassination of Joe Cox and the murder of Mohammed Salim in Birmingham. But And by the way, the same year, of course, was the Lee Rigby murder, which was Islamist. So it's not my position that it should be a competition, but what I'm saying is this is an indicator of how serious the threat of Islamic extremism is. And here's the thing. I really, really get tired of Islamic propaganda and Muslims getting defensive about this. Because it goes like this. We condemn terrorism. Terrorism's awful. These are evil terrorists. It's got nothing to do with Islam. Now, that's a lie. It's just a lie. If you get extreme groups like Boko Haram, Al Shabaab, ISIS, etc., and they are aggressively pushing for an Islamic caliphate, to say that that's got nothing to do with Islam is just a lie. It's simply not true. And no leader should pander to that lie. What leaders can do is say our issue is not with Muslims, our issue is with Islamic extremism. And if Muslims don't like that, that's their problem, frankly. Frankly, it's time for Muslims who live in secular democracies to make a decision. Are they going to back those secular democracies? Are they going to accept that they're not living under Islamic theocracies? And if they accept that, will they accept that Islam is not above criticism? Because this defensive attitude is dishonest and it's unhelpful. But here's the thing that needs to be understood. Anyone can criticize terrorism. That's the easiest thing in the world to do. But when you dig beneath the surface, how many of the people who condemn terrorism, when you push them, would then also believe, oh, but blasphemers should be punished? Because if you take a country like Pakistan, you'll get a lot of people that say they're against the Taliban and other Islamist groups, but the same people would want to have brutal punishments for blasphemers. I remember when a student was killed in Multan a few years ago, brutally lynched. People were saying with a straight face, oh, it was wrong because the mob done it. He should have been tried. So the implication is they didn't have an issue with him being punished. It was just the way it was done, it was bad. So there is a fundamental intolerance in Islam. There really is. Um, that's why I think it is insulting to victims of Islamic extremism to insist that Islam is regarded as peaceful and tolerant until, until Muslims just accept the reality of this, then that's insulting. It really is. You cannot tell me this Islam is a peaceful and tolerant faith when many Muslims actually back the beheading of that teacher. Okay, there's others who condemn it, but we're not talking here about a few fringe figures. We're talking about a sizable proportion of people. That's not bigotry. That's just the empirical evidence that there is. If you go to a conservative Islamic country and ask them what should happen to those who offend the Prophet, then you'll get a pretty good indicator of where Islam is. So I think there's a lot of propaganda and lies, frankly, from those Muslims who are so determined to defend the image of Islam. And we need to reject this. It doesn't help anyone. It really doesn't. You know, there were signs in France saying Islam equals fascism, and I can see where that's coming from because there is an extreme intolerance within Islam. Now, I'm not saying Islamism equates to Islam. I don't think it does. Nevertheless, it's irrefutable that Islamism, Islamist ideology, that is political Islam, comes out of Islam. It's irrefutable. It's absolutely irrefutable. I mean, those who say it's got nothing to do with Islam, my challenge to them would be, are you going to say that the Crusades of the Middle Ages, which the Crusaders believed was ordained by God through the blessings of French and English kings, are you going to say with a straight face that that had nothing to do with Christianity? Of course it did. They believed they were Christian warriors spreading Christendom. Today, jihadists believe they are Islamic warriors spreading the Islamic Caliphate. There's no difference except the time period. So I think it's actually insulting the victims of this ideology to pretend that it doesn't exist. And we must reject political correctness. We must reject the dishonesty of political correctness. And leaders need to start just candidly talking about this for what it is. I'm sick and tired of the hypocrisy of some on the left, and I emphasize some here. I have left wing friends who hate Islamic extremism, but there are some on the left who, with a straight face, will say, "Oh, now that after a terrorist attack, let's say, oh, let's have a candlelit vigil for the victims." And I'm not shunning that. I think I've nothing against that in of itself. What I object to is have that candlelit vigil and then say, "Oh, we must all come together and don't blame Muslims." Right. Well, the implication of that is, of course, don't blame every Muslim. Of course not. But I cannot stand the hypocrisy of those who will call out far right extremism by name, but they will not utter the word Islamic extremism. I've seen it directly. And they actually have this reaction. If you talk about Islamic extremism, they think you're dog whistling to the far right. It really angers me because their moral cowardice is helping no one. All it's doing is shackling debate and putting up barriers to getting solutions to this. Now, what are the solutions? Some propose radical steps like deporting all Muslims and banning Islam, that sort of thing. I think that's unworkable, and I think it would be wrong. I don't believe in collective punishment. That's what China's doing to the Uyghurs. And you know, talking of which, some people look at China and they even praise China. They say, "Oh, so well, China's got it right." But what they need to understand is in China, the context is very different. What China is doing is collective punishment of all Uyghur people. And the Uyghurs are, from what I've seen, I could be wrong, but from what I've seen, they're not particularly hardline religionists. So, for example, Uyghur women often don't wear hijab. Some of them do. I've seen Uyghur women without hijabs. I don't think they're that religious. I mean, at least not in an Islamist sense. So I would say people need to be very, very wary about looking to China as an example. Also, China covers bad news. China has had terrorist attacks, actually. So this argument that, oh well, locking up 1 million people in that way will stop terrorism is not true because China has had terrorist attacks since. It's just that they cover and censor bad news. So I really don't think we should be looking to China as an example. On the other hand, I do think we should be more hardline. I support the French policy, for example, of closing mosques that will not take action against hate preachers or will not. I support, for example, policies of delivering sermons in English or French or German or whatever the native language is rather than Arabic. There are procedures that can be done um, that may be hardline, and you will get lobby groups that will yell how Islamophobic it is. But frankly, we're at a point here where we're dealing with a very, very dangerous ideology, a very intolerant ideology. And it's not good enough to just say, well, we condemn the terrorists and that's it. Those left wing appeasers, and I'm talking about minority of people here, I say to them, what's your solution? What's your solution? Because every time the government tries to do something, Muslim lobby groups claim it's Islamophobic. That's the charge that's being levelled against the Prevent programme, even though Prevent also targets radicalising of far right types. So they need to decide, are they going to work with the government for solutions to tackle Islamic extremism? Or are they going to continue being a barrier and playing the victim? Frankly, Muslims have no right to play the victim in Western countries because you might get incidents of individual hate crimes, but there is no systematic persecution of Muslims in America, Canada, Britain, France, Germany. It's not there. This is one of the lies that Muslim propagandists put out there. Now, I've nothing against an average Muslim person. I see them as an individual. But if they're going to push propaganda, I will push back against that. And it disgusts me, quite frankly, that there are people who think that they're being progressive by being politically correct on this. They think that they're being progressive by saying, "Oh, you can't criticize Islam because that's bigoted." It's not bigoted to criticize a religion or religious ideas or ideology coming from that combination of political that political infusion with religious dogma. It's an extremely dangerous thing, actually. I mean, this should be obvious by now. It really shouldn't be. I shouldn't even have to make this video. It should be obvious. But there are people out there who still insist with a straight face that Islam is peace. Regardless of how you interpret the Quran and if it's peaceful passages, the point is Islamists take the more extreme passages. They take the passages that say, Islam is submission and punish the disbelievers, etc. I mean, the Quran is full of it. I'm sure the Bible's full of it as well. The difference is most Christians do not take the Old Testament as in a literal way. Most Christians interpret the New Testament. There just isn't a comparison. I'm not saying you don't get Christian extremists, you do, but not to the same extent. And I would say that you're not going to get the same sort of response to the mocking of Jesus as you would to the Prophet Muhammad. You just wouldn't. So as far as I'm concerned, the solution has to be more freedom of speech when it comes to Islam, a protection of criticism of Islam, um, action against radical mosques that won't expel Islamists. Although I understand this doesn't just take place in mosques, it takes place online as well. Facebook needs to get its act together and start closing pages that are blatantly promoting terrorism. I think Facebook's been a disgrace when they're targeting right wing conservative activists who are critical of Islam, but they do nothing about terrorist posts. It's a disgrace. Um, pressure on those big social media companies to do more. Um, and for foreign born citizens who promote Islamist ideology, they should be immediately deported. If they are British born, then they need to be de radicalized um, in a humane way. I'm not talking about torturing them. I'm not talking about China's methods. I'm saying that we need to have a very, very assertive approach to this. But one thing that is extremely important is protection, freedom to criticize Islam, and also a rebuke against those who claim everything is Islamophobic, the likes of Mehdi Hassan. I call them the polite face of Islamism. What I mean by that is they will condemn terrorism, but they will spend the other 99% of the time decrying Islamophobia. So that mentality needs to be robustly challenged. They need to be really challenged as to why they think Muslims have it harder in the West than non-Muslims do in Islamic countries. Their position is flawed and they need to be challenged. I am tired of certain Muslims thinking that they can hide behind the Islamophobia narrative. Um, and unfortunately, some people endorse that. Some people in politics, in the media, it's grotesque. It's grotesque when we live in a world where people are brutally lynched or beheaded for insulting Islam that in more free countries, secular societies, you get people actually defending this mentality, defending it by their silence, defending it by equating criticism of Islam with bigotry. It no progressive minded person, no one who really genuinely believes in progress in human society can say that Islam is a religion of peace and tolerance because it isn't. There are peaceful and tolerant Muslims. There are good Muslims, just as there are bad Muslims. But when we hear this propaganda that Muslims are not terrorists, that's actually a positive generalization, and positive generalizations amount to supremacy. Saying that all Muslims are good is a supremacist statement. So Islamic supremacy needs to be challenged. I would say my thoughts are with those who have died in Mozambique, but this just goes on and on and on. Sadly, there'll be many more bodies piling up, but we need to blow back. We need to listen to what the French and Austrian leaders have said because they're right. They're right. We need to understand that this is an ideology that is incompatible with liberal democracies. It really, really is.